Hey everybody, it's Anthony and Tucker here with Land Title, and we wanted to bring you your economic update with our year-end wrap-up for all of 2023. So, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year's, right? We're going to go right into it and just talk about the biggest issue, what's really affecting our market more than anything, and that's, of course, interest rates, right? We can look at this graph, and it shows the historical perspective going all the way back to the 80s of how interest rates have been trending down ever since the Great Recession. They've been below our historical norms, even at the highest point, or excuse me, the lowest point historically, were the highest points we've experienced since that Great Recession. So people like myself and Anthony, we've never experienced expensive money. So that's where a lot of the sticker prices come in.
Right.
But what you can see on the far right of the graph is you can see that blue and red line starting to have that drop, that really sharp drop. That's what we've been waiting for, and that's a really good sign. So hopefully we'll see more of that.
Yeah, and now the other thing that looks really good going into 2024 is just our debt versus GDP ratio, right? So GDP is gross domestic products, like the size of the U.S. economy. The best part about this is our debt is shrinking in relationship to the size of the economy, right? So after borrowing all of that money during the pandemic, you can see there where those lines cross. We do not want that, right? We don't want 100% of GDP versus debt. And so every time that happens, it creates, basically no growth. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a good sign that we're kind of getting back on track here. And that's really all there is to say about it.
Yeah, and then just remember, hey, when we get above that 120 to 130%, that's the panic, that's the red flashing lights. You start looking like China and Ireland.
Well, sure. Or like even, Japan is at like 300%.
Yeah.
This is where you really start to see economies talk about like filing bankruptcy. Is like once you get over that 120 to 30% mark where
It gets harder and harder.
Can't function. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. So talking about our 10-year Treasury note versus the Fed funds rate, right? Fed funds, that is our short-term, couple month, even overnight lending. That's short-term lending, right? That's our credit cards. That's our small-term things. The 10-year Treasury note's long-term lending. And so it's really rare and normally a big sign of a recession when it costs more to borrow money short-term than it does long-term. So that's normally a really big sign for a recession. But this is such a unique situation economically with what the Fed has done and what's going on. We haven't hit a recession, even though every indication says we should. We didn't. So that just shows where we're at and the strength of our economy, even with our Fed funds rate being higher, or more expensive than our Treasury note was. That should cause recession. It didn't. So that's a really good sign.
Soft landing is the word that they've been using for years. Honestly, they sure look like they're going to get one.
We're looking good. We'll take it. All right.
Anthony? All right. So personal savings rate, this is one where, when you print a bunch of money and you hand it out to people, you get, savings rates of 20, 30%, which are those giant spikes right there above Tucker's head. And I think the interesting part about this one is what happens once all that money is gone. Because as people live this lavish lifestyle during the pandemic when, they really couldn't spend money on much, so they just ate out a bunch and, they didn't have to pay their student loan debt. They could spend money and they had a lot of money for it. Well, now that everything's kind of coming due, really personal savings rates are dipping. And this is a good sign because we needed this slowdown in the economy. So this kind of points also to, super, super low personal savings rates mean slowdown in the economy, which means the Fed's getting what they want.
Yep, because people don't have the extra disposable income. Now, when we're talking about income, let's talk about employment. So what we can really see here in this graph is kind of just showing employment across from the 80s to today. But more importantly, just look at Boulder County versus Colorado versus the country. And you can really see how us in Boulder County, our unemployment rate is lower than the state, lower than the country by quite a bit. And we're just in such a strong economic position. We're going to continue to see that really tight labor market here, which really just shows that there's going to be more wage growth and more expansion. And as wage growth increases, jobs are people, more jobs equal more people. And we're going to talk more about that in just a moment.
All right, so this one is basically total employment. So I think the most important part of this entire graph is the fact that look to where we were at the pandemic when everything fell off and just look how much larger our employment numbers are today than they were then. So this is a really good one to show, Colorado's growing faster than the United States. And it's just a very positive sign for us here locally.
Mm-hmm. All right, so our per capita income, once again, we're comparing state versus Boulder County, then to the nation. You can just see how far we are outpacing the rest of even the state. And we're already a high income state for a lot of areas.
Yeah.
And then even comparing that against the nation, you can just see how much higher our incomes are growing and how much more exponential they are per capita income versus, the rest of the state, let alone the country. So it just shows These are slides to show how great and strong and stable Colorado is, let alone Boulder County.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so let's talk about the statewide labor force trends. I think this is just kind of the highlights, right? So we pulled this from one of the state demographers. They are very good about helping us understand why Colorado will grow long term and just how that millennial population is just affecting all this. So
Yep.
when you see a growing aging population, which Colorado's never had, like the East Coast was used to having older people there because it's a much older part of the nation. So now you get this where people over 65 are increasing by 600% from 2000 to 2022. And it's just creating maybe a vacuum of people we're not used to having to care for. Right?
Yeah, right. Because Colorado, generally, when we look at the trends, it's been a younger, healthier state.
Yeah.
A lot of people move here in that 20, either for college or in that 25 to 35 age group. Then they stay here, and then eventually they'll leave to either start a family, get a job, whatever reasons they leave.
Let's break it down for everybody.
A lot of people have actually stayed, and a lot of those people who stayed here when they moved here as young folks are continuing to age, and so we're going to see increased rates as we see here on that right-hand graph of the Colorado projected population growth, of how it's going to continue to increase the farther and farther we go to the right, which is
It's wild,
as
isn't
people
it?
get older. So we can really see where there's just a massive expansion in older populations, and we haven't built out the necessary infrastructure for it. So it's something to keep an eye on of services that folks are going to need as they age in place here in Colorado.
Yeah, and definitely is putting all kinds of pressure in different places. But back to that jobs or people thing, right? Here we are. This one articulates pretty well about net migration, those little black dots, versus job change, or what does it say? Job change? Yeah.
Yeah, job change.
Job change. So net migration is really tied to how many people are coming into the state for a job, right? So net migration last year was actually really low, but it was tailing after that really bad growth year in jobs. So, we had the pandemic year, we had a lot of fallout in jobs. People kind of sat still and they were just trying to figure out, work through it. Well, last time you saw this stuff happen, looks what happens afterwards, right? You see big job growth, you see big net migration or net immigration,
Yeah,
right?
which is great.
So, which is really what we need here. The only problem is they tie to housing units. And when we show you the housing unit numbers, where are we going to need the most housing? We need it for that millennial and Gen Z population that's coming into the workforce, which are huge, right? I mean, in this graph, you see just how big they are.
So us millennials are the biggest. We're the biggest group here. We're the biggest population band. There's not enough starter homes that we can afford as a generational issue,
right?
Which has caused a lot of issues. We all hear about, we all have friends and family who deal with it, but then we can see how our older generations are going to keep expanding as well as time moves, left to right. We're going to keep seeing that purple block just continue to keep moving to the right. And that's really going to affect, what's going on in our housing units. Because right now, people in the green and purple bands are not downsizing even if they need to because of the rate locks. So there's all these little factors. That's why we're bringing this in that tie into why the markets are what they are.
Exactly. All right. So if you look at this one, net migration by age bracket, this really shows you, three states that we all kind of think about, right? People move to Florida to retire. Well, it's because the data suggests they do. And in Colorado, people tend to stick around if they can. But in all reality, it's just that big bulk group of those Gen Z millennials that are coming here to work because lots of good jobs. They're definitely doing it some in California. But obviously, if we enter a place like California, our housing gets too expensive, like you see there. People don't have a choice but to leave to retire. So that's what's being forced out then. Now look, I mean, people really aren't net migrating out of Colorado till they're in their 70s.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But you can really see where the population is. So if we're looking at, hey, what housing units do we need to start building for who's moving to our state and who's entering our force?
Yeah, these are not trade homes.
These are tough. These are starters, and you can see that age group of just where they are in their personal and economic development.
All right, so what about this one?
Yeah, so Colorado by age. This is what we're kind of talking about. Most of these folks, as we see on the 2030 is the orange bars, and that's the projections, right? This is from the state demographer. But I think the big thing to notice here is just how much they're increasing, especially on the older price bands, the older age groups. Been doing too many stat videos. And this is the interesting part is most of them already live here in that far right. But the migration is where they're coming in that 25 to 40 range, 44 range. And that's where we're going to need more of those houses. And that's where we're going to need more of those starter units and starter houses to help kind of get people in that first home. We just don't have that. And we'll see development going forward, but just something to notice there.
Basically, we're reiterating the same thing here. Look at this retired population net growth all the way to 2030. I mean, we're talking about a lot of people, the retirement age, retired age, long-term care age, all things that we really haven't addressed well in the state of Colorado going forward. So let's turn a corner and talk about housing.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is just a nice little snapshot across the country of what's going on in February. We can see where that median is at 387. That's not really realistic here in Colorado or let alone Boulder County, but it just shows the nation where that median is. That's half of the sales are underneath that amount. So it's so important to remember when people talk about housing, it's all local. It's all local. Someone moving from out of state here is going to have a much different opinion of our housing than we do living here and being used to it. So
the other thing to really notice on here is start keeping track of like a frame of reference for when we start to talk to Colorado, because this is a good slide for this, where you can see median sales price increase 4%. We're going to start to compare that to what happened in Colorado, and it gives us a good view of what's going forward, right? So look at this. This is the housing price index. Yet again, Boulder County, median, average, and then all transactions by their index. Basically what this is showing is there's a divergence between our average and our median because we keep building bigger and bigger homes. That is increasing probably a lot faster than our average wage growth. And so with that housing price index, this just kind of shows that just the pressure on housing that's taking place right now.
And then what we're seeing here is our existing inventory is we kind of we peaked out in 2023, beginning of right around the end of 23.
Yeah.
We kind of peaked out on inventory, and we're going to see this slide down, and then we'll see it really kind of drop January, February, then March start picking up, and then really start increasing, March, April, May, because we're back into the seasonality of the housing market. Pretty straightforward. Just something to notice. Hey, we're going through our usual trends again, nationwide and locally.
Yeah. So, total number of units, right? 1.1 million, like you saw on the last slide, doesn't always reflect in 2 months supply, because this is really tied to more of that, buyer demand coupled with sales, right? So buyer demand has been really low all year. You're starting to see that month supply of inventory on a national level float up. Really, we don't want to be above about 6%, right? We want 4 to 6%. We kind of want to keep it in balance on a national level.
4 to 6 months.
4 to 6 months. Yes, not 4 to 6 units. 4 to 6 months of inventory. And you can see when we enter recessions just how inventory really starts stepping up. And they got what they wanted, right? They raised the cost of money. They made it much more difficult. So homes start to sit on the market a little bit higher. Well, now we're well above where we want to be. And you're going to start to see this come down in 2024, because we're going to be in that transitioning year the other direction from what we just experienced.
So this is when we look at our days on market, it's just a good way to kind of get an idea across the country of what is the general trend and the general speed of our market. Right now in December, January, this time of year, it's slower. We're looking at 60 days across the country as a median. That's a lot different than here in Boulder County, but not too far off. What we'll really notice is once our market heats up a lot faster than the national market does in our days on market. So we can even get closer down to those 40, 30, 20 days, depending on the speed of the market locally. So it's just another trend to look at is how much faster our local market moves than the national.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about Colorado versus everybody else for a minute before we dive into the local Colorado data. But this is interesting because in the last quarter, the national average was 1.6% appreciation. We had 0.7, right? So in Q4, it made it just a little challenging. But then when you get over to over the last year, what really happened here? Well, Colorado was actually negative over the year because we did see some price depreciation because we went up so fast, right? You saw this in the West a lot. So look at all the Western states, how they're all red like that. That was because we were in this vacuum during that low cost of money era. So 3% nationally, that's not terrible, but it's just not what we're used to experiencing. But then look what happened from 1991 to current. This is where we outperformed so much in that area of the country that when you look at the grand scheme of things, this is an awesome area to invest in, even if we saw a little blip. And I think we're going to be right off to the races here soon.
Yeah, we're already noticing it 2 weeks into the year of what's going on, what we're seeing.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, this is that historical trends where you say real estate is long term, right?
Totally.
Especially, if you're buying some on the MLS for top of the market for what you exactly want, that is a long term investment.
Yep.
And it's important for people to understand that when they see those, hey, yeah, we hit the bottom last year. Last year was our bottom of the
Totally.
real estate cycle, right? We always talk about cycles in real estate. We hit the bottom.
This might help.
Yeah,
So
here we
let's look
go.
about showing traffic, right? You
And
can really see it here.
yeah, and as we can see those two really busy years in the beginning of 21 and 22 before it really dropped off with rates in 22. And then we saw how it went back up in 23, but not to the same levels as it was. And showings are a great way to judge what's going on in the market and what the buyer activity will be going forward. So
For
it's a
sure.
really good way to kind of track, hey, how are we looking so far? This is all for last year still, but it's important to note that, yeah, we're off, but it's not like we're off a cliff. It's just off from the very highs
Right.
to little lows. Felt a lot more than if it was muted and less gains.
Exactly. So here's Colorado specifically. You can see just kind of how last year stacked up. And it started to really slow down towards that fourth quarter time where you just didn't see the showing volume. But the big difference was as we kind of went to the end of the year, you saw that rate drop a little bit and it just kept showings a little more steady than we've seen in years past.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if Showing Time is going to release this slide. This might be the last time you see it from us because that is the stagnant image that's left on their website right
They
now.
have not
So-
updated it as of this morning when I looked.
Yeah, they're not changing it.
And they also got bought by Zillow, so who knows what they have in the plans for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so this is just a great snapshot looking over Colorado. This is put out by like Colorado Association of Realtors, and we're just kind of looking at our medians. We are up month over month. We're up year over year, so those are really good numbers. But we're not up a ton, and that's okay. We're not trying to have massive appreciation. Some areas we're actually down a little bit, but as a whole, the state is up. Right? It's all local. That's the most important part. But it's just important to understand our month supply of inventory is up. So that means, hey, less competition, things might sit longer, days on market's up. Our inventory is lower. So this is something going into the year that we want to keep a really close eye on is the inventory levels, because as buyers will pick up, sellers take longer and there's a delay. They won't be the same.
Right.
Once market picks up and the sellers are getting the numbers that they want, there's a delay between when that next seller and the neighbor puts their house on the market.
Exactly. So this is a report that CAR puts out as well. This is their lender report or whatever that really means, right? So let's break this down just a little bit for you. I think the one thing you want to look at here is just, REOs, short sales. Let's have that conversation about like, are we in a healthy market, healthy economy? As you can see, things have not really changed in the last year. You're not seeing more short sales. You're not seeing, people aren't really underwater. The only people that were really underwater were like that peak of 2022 that bought.
Yeah.
But other than that, like that's going to be solved this year, right? Like in 24, no big deal. So you can see that, traditional sales volume and all of this, like look at the prices, look at what's happening. It's just, this basically says no worries, right?
Mhm.
Like don't stress about it. This is not something that's coming down the pike in our future. It's the only reason I included it. So let's kind of turn a corner and talk from big picture state level data. Here
Yeah,
in
and this
Colorado.
is all for single family. So we're talking only single family right now. No multi, nothing like that. But this is where we're really looking at it is looking at our percent changes. Our year to dates are huge numbers off. This is where we're really going to see it is our pending under contracts were down 15%. Our solds were down 19%. Our new listings were down 17%.
Yep.
Inventory will be the story going forward. We hit the low last year. Last year was the low. And we can see that through the median actually decreased a little bit. Now the average went up, and that's because there's just that discrepancy between the median part of the market and just a super high-end luxury property skew that average a lot. But then we look at that percent list price received. So that's what you went under contract for, or what was on the market for, and what you went under contract for. We're still at 98.9% for the year, which is a decrease, but that's still really, really good.
It's a very healthy number.
That is a really strong number. That leans a little seller, but it starts getting into more of the buyers.
Yeah, it's totally a seller's market in some ways, but it doesn't show you the concessions. It doesn't show you price drops, that kind of stuff. So just understand that when we talk about baseline, we talk about resetting a new floor. Like 2023 was that year to do that. When we get over the townhouse condos, you can see that the market isn't a ton different, right? Inventory didn't drop quite as much, but honestly, look at the pendings, the under contracts and sold numbers. We're talking minus 19% for total sales. But then that median stayed a little more stable. The average stayed a little more stable. It went up just a little bit. If the cost of money changes your buying behavior, if you can't afford a detached single family home, what do? You go buy something that's attached, duplex, row home something, right?
Yeah.
So, and with the amount of townhomes we build in Colorado, these aren't really like you went from a single family home to a condo, right? They actually are just buying more townhouse type products because with the condo defect laws, that's what we've been building. So
Yeah.
when you see that and you see the stability in this market, it just shows you resilience in Colorado. And I think that's a good sign because we hit that level. That was kind of what we're looking at. And then as we start moving forward, you're going to see all of these things really take off.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, what about the last one? I think we put this in here for historical perspective.
Yeah.
Right?
And this is really just looking at it long term, how it just trends seasonality. It's normal. Let me move my big head. Nope, wrong way. Let me get a little closer. And we can just see how muted last year was in the single family of what was coming on for our pending under contracts. We just saw how muted it was compared to really all the way back to maybe 2011 was 11, 12 was the last time we experienced a market like this. So like we were mentioning, we're hitting the floor, we're hitting the reset. So this is just more historical information to kind of look at where we've been and where we can go.
Well, and look at the transition years. So look at 2012, look at like a 2015, look at like a 2019, right? Like when you start looking at these years that start to transition, you can really see how those under contract numbers can go up really fast and in a hurry, especially as interest rates start to become a little more favorable. And that inventory is going to stay really low coupled with that because as those buyers come to market fast, your sellers aren't going to respond well. So if you have people that want to list a home or you're working with folks that are unsure, I mean, you really got to help get some good information to them and get them off the fence because they will make really good decisions listing early this year. And if your buyers can get out and buy early, they might be in the same boat where they're less competitive, but you are going to see more competition, right? If you wanted the best deal, you should have bought in November or December. And here we are kind of hitting the reset button and off to the races. So This is what we've got for you today. Thank you for joining us for our economic update. Tucker and I love doing this stuff.
Yeah, and if you have any questions or want to dive into a little bit deeper, just reach out to us. We're more than happy to talk through it with you and really hope you have a great 2024, and we look forward to working with you.
See you next time.
Cheers.